Have you ever experienced road rage? If you have your license, maybe you've experienced it personally, or you've at least been in the car with someone who has road rage while driving. Or maybe you've been in a car with someone and another car has raged towards you. Or what about hallway rage? I just made that term up. But hallway rage would be what happens when someone bumps into you between classes and makes you drop your phone or your books. Or, someone's walking way too slow in front of you and you just go off, at least in your mind. Hallway rage it's a real thing. And if you don't yell at someone or act out, you probably know the feeling of that kind of rage inside of you. Instead of calling it rage or anger, maybe you'd say that you're frustrated. And so when your sister shrinks your favorite shirt in the wash, you aren't mad, you're frustrated. When your friend leaves you on red or seen all day, you feel frustrated. When that one kid acts like they're superior to basically everyone, you get frustrated enough to hope they faceplant in front of everyone. Why? We don't like to think of ourselves as angry. But let's be honest, is there a difference between being mad and being frustrated? Is there a difference between road rage and road frustration? We're in this series about our emotions or the vibe inside. I wish that didn't rhyme. It sounds so ridiculous, but the vibe inside is such an accurate description of our internal emotional environments. But we're also talking about keeping those vibes from controlling us. And one of the emotions that shows up for everyone and tries to take over is anger. Sometimes anger means yelling at someone or losing your temper, but sometimes it means giving someone the silent treatment. Not only is it a way for you to process your anger, but the silent treatment is a way for you to control the situation, right? You hold the power because you withhold the words. Even more complicated, not all anger is bad. There's the anger we feel when we see injustices. When we see things like certain groups of people treated unfairly, or causes that we care about not being taken seriously, racism, or people who don't have clean water. When we see things happening in the world that aren't right, it's a good thing to get angry. Jesus got super angry when people were mistreated, like flipping the furniture angry. And so it isn't always bad. In fact, sometimes anger is constructive. It moves us towards positive action. But then other times it's destructive. It moves us towards regret and it hurts people. And so what are we supposed to do with that? Either way, anger is a powerful emotion. The question is, what do we do with it? And how do we keep destructive anger from taking over and bossing us around? And so the book of James has something to say about this. James actually gives us a principle that may sound a little too simple at first, but hang in there because if you and I can learn to do this, it will change everything. James, in James chapter 3, verse 13, he starts by saying this: "Who is wise and understanding among you?" And so right there, we hear the word wise a lot, but we may not really focus on what it actually means. See, wise is different from smart. You can be born smart, but wisdom is earned. If you're wise, you take what you've experienced and you learn from it. You understand that life's connected and that actions have consequences. And so James is asking, how many of you get that? And if you do get it, here's what I have to say next. And so he continues. He says, "Let them show it by their good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom." And so James he's connecting the dots here, right? He's saying that wise people are humble. And so what does humility look like? It starts with a proper view of yourself. Humility looks like this. You don't see yourself as the exception to the rules. You don't think the world revolves around you and your desires. You don't think that you deserve better treatment than everyone else. James is saying that wise people don't do these things. And he continues. He says, "But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth." So if you let stuff stay with you that makes you think you're better or more important, don't deny it, call it out. Don't pretend to be fine. And then James says this. He says, "For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice." Another way of saying this is when pride or arrogance gets lodged inside of us, it comes out in our actions. And that's not the best news, but James doesn't leave us hanging. A few verses later, he asks another question. He asks in James chapter 4, verse 1. He says, "What causes fights and quarrels among you?" Now, I bet I could stop right there and everyone would have an answer to that question. What causes fights among you? You might say, well, parents with unrealistic expectations or unrealistic rules, younger siblings that won't stop being annoying, friends that don't text back, people with obnoxious TikTok accounts. We all have an answer to that question, but they all have to do with external factors. James is saying, no. He says, don't they come from your desires that battle within you? In other words, your mom may drive you crazy and your little brother may be annoying, but what causes the arguments? It's not them, it's you. Or more specifically, it's what's inside you. And this is a big deal because as long as we think the problem is someone else, it's their behavior and their character, their mistake, we'll never deal with the anger problem inside of us. We think the problem is people not doing things our way, but James is saying the problem is that we want to get our way. But as long as we think the problem is outside of us, we'll never take care of what's inside of us. And so you might say, well, that doesn't really sound fair. But James isn't talking about what's fair and what's not. He's saying that if we want to get to the root of our frustration and anger, we need to be willing to admit that the problem is in us. The problem is when we don't get what we think we deserve. And I understand that this sounds terrible and it sounds unfair, but I'm telling you, when you start doing this, relationships change. Our anger changes. Why? Because we're no longer looking to other people as a reason for why we feel the way we feel. As long as we're looking to other people as the reason for feeling the way we feel, other people have control over our emotions. So James is making the point that as long as we think the problem is outside of us and that it's someone else's fault, we're just going to feel like we get a free pass to act however we want. Right? Because we can say that we didn't do anything wrong, right? We can avoid ownership and we can avoid responsibility. We can look at others and say, well, they made me do it. They made me say it. They left me no choice. But James is saying, nope. If you did that thing or said that thing that was angry or mean or hurtful, it was because it was in you to say it or do it. And now, of course, there are circumstances that should upset us. Like when we're treated unfairly by a sibling or a friend or a parent. But imagine if in the middle of feeling our anger and frustration, we were able to say, part of the problem, not the whole problem, but part of it is that I'm not getting what I want. Just being willing to say that out loud helps keep yourself from being controlled by anger and frustration. Owning what we can own is the problem keeps our anger and our frustration from driving us and owning us. And so here's my question for you. What's your relationship with anger? Do you control it? Or does it control you? Now, if I were to ask someone close to you, like a mom or dad or step-parents, brother or sister, even a coach or teammates, what would they say? Because if anger is controlling you in any of those relationships, it's probably controlling you too much. And the only way to beat it, according to James, is with humility. Humility says, it's not all my fault, but I'm going to own my part of it. And my part of it has to do with me not getting my way when I want to. And so when we feel anger, frustration, or whatever you want to call it, rising up, when we're in that disagreement with a parent or a sibling, ask yourself, what am I not getting that is causing this anger? Because even if you aren't the whole problem, humility means recognizing that you are part of the problem. And when you learn how to recognize that, the emotion of anger begins to lessen its control over you. And the good news here is that for those of us who are Jesus followers, we follow someone who has led the way in this. Jesus said no to getting his way. In fact, the Apostle Paul wrote about this very thing when he talks about Jesus in the book of Philippians chapter 2, verse 6 and 7. He says, who, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in a human likeness. Jesus had every reason and every right to get his own way, but he didn't. He gave up what he wanted so that we could know how valuable we are in God's sight. And Paul starts this passage about Jesus and his humility by saying this, therefore, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any sharing in the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love. He tells us to be like Christ. And then he tells us what Christ is like. Humble when he had every reason not to be. Jesus surrendered his way when he could have easily fought for it. So following the example of Jesus is how we keep anger from controlling us. Think of it this way. Remember this point. Because of Jesus, anger doesn't have to be the boss of you. Now, I really believe that following Jesus will make your life better. Not that that's what it's about. That's not why we come to Jesus, but it's one of the benefits of having relationship with him. I really believe that. Because when you follow him, he'll nudge you away from self-centeredness, arrogance, and pride, and he'll move you towards humility and love for others. And as that happens, you'll find that anger no longer has the hold on you that it did before. And less powerful anger is a win for everyone. And so here's a question for you. In your personal circumstances, what would it look like for you to choose wisdom and humility over anger?